Okay. I hear audio. Oh, good.
I hear lots of feedback.
Yeah. See if it's still doing that. Are you still getting feedback?
Nope.
No?
No feedback.
Okay. How about now?
Nope. Still no feedback.
Cool. Okay, so let me see. And then I can go to there. That changes that. That changes that. Okay, good. And then I'm going to try to do live on Facebook. And can you just find the ACF page and see if it's... It should be, it's doing, preparing something. I don't know what it's doing, but let's see what. All right, do you see anything on Facebook?
I don't see it yet.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're just about to get started. My name is Dustin Hurt. I'm the chapter director of ACF Philadelphia. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope so. We're gonna get started in a couple of minutes here, but I just want to go over a couple of quick sort of items about how the Zoom webinar format works. This might be a little different than what you've experienced in the past. We have like 60 people on the call, and to have everyone have a little video window, that would be great, but also maybe not the best format. There's a couple different ways though you can interact. We will be taking questions. There's a Q&A sort of button on the menu. You can just click that and you can type in your questions. Some of them will respond by text. Others will we'll have a moment where we can do audio questions. Adam is going to present his talk in several sections, and each section he'll also stop and take questions. And during that moment, there's actually kind of an interesting function where you can raise your hand. Sorry, sounds so much like school, but you can raise your hand, and then in that section, we will accept voice questions. It'll turn on your microphone. Not your video, but just your microphone. And you can ask the question directly to Adam. And today I'm being assisted by Andy Thiroff, who's helping with the back end. This is actually the first time we've done a Zoom presentation, so hopefully everything goes nice and smoothly. But if you have any issues, just send me a message. You can also send that through the chat. If there's any technical problems, we'll try to help you out with those. But I think that's it. We're gonna try to wrap up definitely by 6:30. This is designed as really an overview, entry level 101 kind of level course to streaming live performance on the internet, through the internet, not necessarily through Zoom, but through other applications that Adam will talk about. And you could also use this to collaborate in rehearsals and so forth. And we'll have further workshops coming up later in the summer and early in the fall that are designed more towards, like, say, education or other, more creative focused conversations. So look forward to those coming up a little bit later in the year. I think that's it for my announcements. Once again, thanks for being here and taking the time this afternoon. We will follow up with a survey afterwards just to see what you thought, any topics that you would like us to come up with, and hopefully we'll continue to do these workshop series. Again, thanks. If you're just joining us, I'm Dustin Hurt. I'm the director of the ACF chapter. And today's presenter is Adam Vidiksis, and I'm gonna just turn it over to him. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. Dustin, I am not able to start my video just because it's disabled by the host. Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Actually, let me just shut this door for noise. Thanks for being here. Hopefully this will be a useful talk for all of you. I will, as I said, be taking questions, and for some of this, if you have some of these software installed, or you can do it quickly, you'll be able to follow along. But I'll be giving instructions and walking you through those processes, so hopefully you'll be able to see how that works as we go. I'm just going to share here. Okay. Today we'll be talking about streaming live performance, and in particular, looking at ways that you can connect musicians for live performance for both rehearsals as well as concert presentations and things of that sort. I'd like to take a moment to thank the American Composers Forum Philadelphia chapter for putting this together, and Dustin and Andy for all the work that they've done and for asking me to present this work. I'd also like to thank some of my principal collaborators in this research that I've been doing since everything went up in smoke in really February and March. And in particular, Scott L. Miller at St. Cloud State University, my longtime collaborator, Rajiv Medela, AKA Currency, and Sam Wells at Cal Arts, as well as my students at Temple University, particularly those in our music technology ensemble, which is called BEEP, or the Boyer Electroacoustic Ensemble Project. And in particular, I'd like to thank 3 students that have really been working hard on this: Andrew Litz, Jonah Pfluger, and Marina Ballesteros. So the experience that I'm drawing from, in particular with presenting this, is quite a few different things, but one of them is the Zalons that are hosted by Andrea Clearfield, and that's an extension of her long-time salon series that she's held in her home. And I was somewhat serendipitously scheduled to perform along with my music technology ensemble, BEEP, at the March salon. And that was the first event in that series' 33-year history that was canceled. So through blizzards and Super Bowls and everything else, Andrea has held that event monthly throughout her performance season. And this was the first time, and it was obviously the right choice, because for health reasons, we know that that's what needed to happen. But what I suggested to her at that time is that there was a possibility that we could find ways to do this. And I knew that I had been working with telematic performance for a while. And most of the time when we talk about something like that, we're talking about sort of the best scenarios, maybe, you know, at a university, maybe even have an internet 2 connection, which is a super fast internet connection, things like this. And I was, you know, I thought we can do this in a more limited way. And that started that research, and really moving ahead with that I knew was already out there also in a lot of different commercial ways. Additionally, a lot of this research happened through the Splice Institute, where it's a music technology based group. Splice Music is a group that puts on a lot of different events, festivals, and an institute where people can learn at Western Michigan University, and it happens all around the country throughout the year. And so we held a number of concerts through that, as well as through numerous rehearsals that I have been able to have over these past 4 months or 3 months, I guess 4 months now. That sort of the proof is in the pudding, and sort of dialing all these things in and really getting them to work. So I know a lot of people have been, you know, a lot of musicians have been really starving to be able to perform with other people. And I've actually sort of been able to have that fix throughout this time, and I'm having multiple rehearsals every week and really being able to continue in that way, which of course is so precious and valuable. So we'll take a look at all of these things, but I just wanted to thank all of those folks and the work that they've done in putting this together and helping me with this research, and teaching me what they know. So who is this for? So the first thing to note is that this is not for pro audio. We're not talking about the absolute sort of best equipment, the best connections. We're thinking about what can we do with what the typical performer, the typical musician might have in their home. So even someone who might have access to an incredible studio somewhere else, but that studio has been not accessible during this time. You know, what can we do while we're at home with the types of things that we have, and maybe with perhaps upgrading with a small budget of a couple of $100s, but maybe also not, maybe just with whatever we happen to have, assuming someone has the ability to connect to the internet via a mobile device or a computer, right? So we're talking about performers and presenters that are looking to do this for concerts and rehearsals. But again, with sort of the commercial products that you might have at home, not something like what they do to remotely mix, for example, the Grammys, right? That is also done remotely, but requires you know, millions of dollars of equipment that we're not going to be discussing in this particular talk. People who are interested in playing music with each other in real time, whether or not you're going to present that to an audience. So just being able to rehearse and make music with other people in a safe way, being able to do it remotely is really important. And then of course, people who want to share music with an audience. So there's a number of topics that we'll cover during the course of this talk. I will typically kind of go through a particular section and then stop for questions. So as you have questions, you know, I will pause, but please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll have a time for a Q&A at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the whole talk. I'll also be demonstrating a number of these different techniques and software as we go throughout. So we'll be talking about hardware, for home concerts, best practices for audio, home staging, and working with video, best practices for your home network, as well as music networking software and video streaming software. So again, I want to talk a little bit about the approach that guides all of these things as we're going through it. First thing to note is that we're not trying to replicate live concerts. We can't do that. That is a really incredible, magical experience where we're together in the same space, and we enjoy that for a number of different reasons, right? And really honing in on why do we want live performance? What is essential about live performance, and what can we bring from that to the remote interconnected networking environment that we're talking about? How can we duplicate those important things and maybe even expand on them in ways that these platforms allow, right? So maybe there's things that might actually even be better about hearing music in this way. What are those things? But we're not looking to duplicate the live concert experience because we simply can't. If we're not physically in the same space, we're just not going to have that. So what can we do to create the type of things like community, right? Like the sense of danger, right? That, you know, one of the things we enjoy about going to hear a live performance is that this performer is going to get up in front of everyone and they might fail, right? So failure is an important part of that. And then seeing them accomplish great artistry, hearing incredible music from somebody in real time, and knowing that that is difficult and this person could, as any performer could, not do that, not achieve that success. That sort of tightrope walk is an enjoyable part of the process. You know, we of course all love it, you know, that moment when the audience is, you know, immediately applauds or jumps out of their seats or whatever it is. That type of energy is really important, and where we can't get that same sense. You're not sitting quietly next to people, but you can kind of see and hear and understand the audience's sort of vibe and the way that they're responding to the performance. We can try to figure out how we can duplicate that sense of community. And that's really important. So we're not going to be able to duplicate it, but we're going to figure out how to sort of bring those essential elements, replicate them in the networked concert, and then create something essentially new out of that. And additionally, we're going to figure out how can we make the most of the platforms that are available. So whatever's out there, we're going to sort of utilize it to its best ability, understanding that it has limitations, but working as best we can to improve those or sort of get the most that we can out of it. But also, again, finding perhaps ways that something new might come, right? So there might be actually elements, and we'll see what those are, that are better than a live performance in certain ways. Not to say that overall the experience of having a networked concert is better than a live concert, but there can be elements perhaps that are better or are advantageous. And then how can we improve on those or capitalize on those advantageous aspects? So let's start with our first topic, which is going to be hardware for home concerts. And, you know, this is a challenging one in certain ways, because really the answer is it depends, right? You need to take a look at what you're trying to do and the type of setup that you have, you know, particularly what sort of instrument or voice, what are you looking to do with it? And then find out how to deal with that, right? And that's going to be very different for everyone, right? So if you're a pianist, you're going to need certain things. That's going to be very different than, for example, I'm a percussionist and I have my drum kit here. So I have a very different setup, right? And so what I require what is going to work for me is just not going to work for everyone else. So instead of saying, here's what to do, I'm going to present you with some rules of thumb and also some resources to find those types of things that will work for you. So one thing is, it really is worth investing in an upgrade. Even a small investment is going to make a big difference in your sound quality, right? So if you're working with, for example, the bare bones, assuming you have a computer, you're working with the internal microphone, the internal speakers, that's going to cause, it's going to be difficult to get good sound in that case, right? Those are not optimized for musical situations. There's a lot of noise in that your computer makes, like the fans are whizzing to keep the computer cool. There, you know, all of those types of things come into play. And so, you know, it's noisy, and the microphone itself is also probably small because it might be embedded in a laptop or whatever it may be. It might be optimized for the speaking voice and not for whatever particular instrument you're talking about. So, you know, one of the best things that you can do if you're starting from sort of square one is to get an external microphone. And we'll talk a little bit about what those options might look like for you. But, you know, it's also just, even if you have already, for example, an external mic, but are saying, well, what else could I do to improve? You know, one of the best rules of thumb is to say sort of your sound quality is only as good as the weakest link in your audio chain. So, you know, one of the best things you can do, and I always recommend to people with an investment, say, I want to spend this much money, just a little bit, whatever it may be. What can I do to improve it? Find what is the weakest thing, what is the cheapest or the worst thing that you have in that particular system. And then if you can upgrade that, that's going to be a big improvement. So the external mic is not only going to reduce noise, as we said, by being able to get it outside of your computer and reduce the type of machine sounds that are going to happen internally in your computer, it's going to also allow for better framing and location. For example, you know, there's going to be most likely an optimal position for you to put the microphone in relationship to your instrument. And for most of the time, that's not the same position that is optimal for getting a good picture, right? For getting a good video of your performance. And so being able to separate those two, to have an external mic and then even maybe an external camera that allows you to capture both of those, is really going to make a big difference, as well as not only improving the audio quality or video quality itself, just simply being able to, even with a mic of, say, exactly similar quality as to what you would have in your computer, just being able to do that alone, being able to find an optimal position for those and to remove, for example, that audio from the machine noise right there is going to be a big improvement for you. So what do you need in this case? And again, the answer to this is going to be very, very different depending on your instrument and what you're looking to do. There are two things that I might recommend or bring up to you if you're not familiar with external microphones. The first one being a USB mic, and the other one being an audio interface with additional microphones, right? So you're still going to need microphones if you get an audio interface. And we'll take a look at these and compare these in certain ways. But you can see, for example, on the left, we have an example of a sort of typical USB mic, the blue Yeti. So the blue is the manufacturer and Yeti is the model. And then here we have like a PreSonus sort of basic 2x2, 2 inputs and 2 outputs interface, and a AKG C214 kind of very standard type of microphone that you might use. So let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of one or the other of these. So USB mics are going to be somewhat easier. So they're a little bit of a starter position. They don't necessarily sacrifice quality in a lot of cases. The microphones are quite good. They're not going to be, say, as good as some of the like high quality studio professional mics that that a recording studio would use or professional broadcasters would use. But we're not, again, looking at that. We're not looking, you know, if you're going to be looking to spend $8,000 on a microphone, it's probably not going to be a USB microphone. But for the purposes that we're talking about, these can be extremely useful and an easy way to get a massive improvement in the quality of your audio. So it has built-in analog to digital conversion. So not to get too deep into the woods about this, but essentially you have you know, a microphone, it's transducing sound into electrical signals. But before those electrical signals can be useful to your computer, they need to be made into numbers. And so that conversion process has to happen somewhere. You have a sound card built into your computer that does this. So anytime your computer is either taking in sound from the microphone or taking an audio file, like you're playing some music on iTunes or whatever it may be, and then that's playing out of your speakers, it's doing this either analog to digital, or if it's coming out of your speakers, digital to analog conversion. So your built-in sound card can handle some of that. But what we're looking for in this case is how to be able to, we need to be able to connect outside stuff, and then we need to be able to convert that signal. So in the case of a USB mic, the conversion is going to happen inside the body of the microphone, and then it's going to send that signal via a typical USB cable that you're, I'm sure, used to plugging into your computer all the time. Usually it has a little bit less good conversion quality. So these ADCs, these converters can be better or worse. Usually the better it is, the more expensive it is. And because USB mics tend to be on the cheaper side, and also they're looking to keep them smaller, right? So that it fits in the form factor of the microphone, it tends to be a little bit less good conversion quality. But what you'll find is that it's a significant improvement over, for example, using your internal microphone on your computer. So you're going to see a big improvement for only a very small investment. So we're talking about less than $200 in the case of most USB mics. Many of them are $100. So we're talking about in that price range, for example. It's only going to provide you a single mic, right? So it's just one. You know, you could get multiple USB mics and plug those in via multiple USB ports, but only each one is going to be a single input source. And the other advantage is that these are much cheaper, as I mentioned. For an audio interface plus a mic, an audio interface, the AD conversion is done in the audio interface itself. Really, that's its primary job, is that it's taking in input signals from microphones, which are sending it just sort of electrical signals. And its job is to then do that conversion. And so it usually has faster digital signal processing, so it can do more if needed, which means that it can also have more inputs and outputs. So we don't just have to have one microphone. So the audio interface I showed, for example, in this slide, has two inputs. So right away with this sort of basic level audio interface, we could already plug in two mics, and there's audio interfaces that have many more inputs as well as outputs. So if you wanted to have two channels out to stereo, that's going to be the typical sort of baseline, but you could also have many more outs for, or whatever, as many as, you know, obviously the more outputs, typically the higher the price. And because it has more inputs, it's typically going to also have, for example, things like preamps, preamplifiers that will be able to take in the mic sound and amplify it before it goes in. You don't really need to know too much about that. I encourage you to research this and find out more if you're going down the sort of audio interface route. But it's more useful. So this, it's more flexible in the way it can be used in that sense, right? So you can plug in multiple mics. You don't have to have the same mic every time. If you have an instrument that requires multiple mics, right? So like my drum set, I currently have 7 mics on it. Drum sets usually require more microphones, whereas some instruments just require one, and really that's all it needs to get the job done. These are also tend to be more expensive. They're not only more expensive because the audio interface itself, you might be able to find an audio interface that sort of has a comparable price to a USB mic, but then you also need the microphones, right? So the audio interface is totally separate from the microphones that you might use. So that's why you saw in this diagram that I have both the audio interface and a microphone, like the AKG C214. You need to get those mics separately. And the mics themselves can also be more, be expensive. Anything from about $80 to $100, typical sort of Shure SM57 or SM58 type of, bang them up in a bar, dip them in your beer type, really bang up workhorse microphones, which are fantastic, all the way up to whatever you want to spend, obviously, on a mic. Additionally, you also need the audio cables, XLR cables. It's a little bit more technically complex to maybe get all of that hooked up and working. Are you powering the mics properly via phantom power? There's other things to consider that make an audio interface and mic setup a bit more complicated, but certainly not something to shy away from if that's the route you want to go. That's going to get you a better quality of sound. But the USB mic is also going to be very useful, much easier to use, like I said, and cheaper. So these are just some options for sort of how to move forward with that, okay? Before we end this sort of best practices for audio, I want to encourage everyone to learn the best or the most standard way to mic your instrument. So you should be knowledgeable on that topic. So for example, an audio engineer would know all of these things, all of the instruments, as well as, and this is where the audio engineer's skill really comes into play, is that he or she are going to know how all of these different microphones and setups might combine together to create a really complex interaction, right? So you now have to mic a whole horn line, maybe all of the things in the horn line each have individual mics, maybe there's also mics just for the horn line as a whole. So it becomes, the more mics you add, the more complex the system becomes. So you don't need to know all of that when you're talking about just for yourself, but as an instrumentalist or vocalist, you do want to know how to mic yourself. Now, I encourage you, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. Be aware that while you might feel quite knowledgeable after having done this for a while on how to mic yourself in a solo situation and what the best sound is, you're like, oh, I love the sound of this mic and I love it when I position it in this way, and you research this and you know all of that. When you get in those situations again, that you're able to be back in community environments and you're working with an experienced audio engineer, trust that audio engineer. They are going to know other things that might be coming into play. So rather than saying, no, 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 this is the mic, I always use this mic, this is my mic, you might find that they are dealing with other types of things that are, again, part of the complexity of that. So while it's important to understand how to mic yourself in a solo situation, as well as really any audio engineer, it's very easy to do and learn that. Just be aware when you get back into those type of situations to trust your audio engineer because of the complexity of how all those things combine together. I just want to point out that there are really there's many different types of sort of microphones, the way in which they transduce sound. The two most common that you're going to find is dynamic versus a condenser. So find out which one you need for your instrument. Condensers tend to be more sensitive. They also require an external power source, which is usually going to be provided from your audio interface or mixer. It's called phantom power. So with condensers, it's good at picking up sort of lighter sounds, higher frequency sounds, things like that. So dynamic mic uses a totally different method of transducing sound that makes it more rugged. So it's not as sensitive, but that's pretty good if you're going to stick it, a foot in front of a trumpet, right? You wouldn't want to find yourself, your ears a foot in front of a trumpet playing at fortissimo. So a condenser mic would kind of get blown out in that scenario, and a dynamic mic wouldn't. So, I mean, the rule of thumb is if it's a loud instrument, then usually dynamic mics are going to be the way to go. But just look that up. You can find out very easily what the types of things, even examples of microphones by model number, et cetera, that are going to be useful for you to know about. So look that up and find that out. I just want to mention that you do typically want to keep the mic close to the source. Exactly how close is dependent on a number of different things, type of sound that you're going for, what is typical for your instrument. Some instruments sound better with the mic a little bit further away. And again, these are things that you can look up in these resources for your specific instrument or vocal practice, whatever it would be. But typically what we're trying to do is get that close to the source and mostly eliminate then other things that might be getting in there, right? So the closer it is, the clearer the signal will be as compared to the noise. So we call it the signal to noise ratio, like the noise in the room. So like your HVAC system or your neighbors or whatever it would be when we're talking about doing this in the home, right? So just be aware of that and again, look that up. One last thing is you probably want to try to control the room acoustics a little bit. This is extremely common in pro audio situations where people are going to soundproof the room to make it optimal for the type of recording that they want to do, right? So it might be a reverberant space for live stuff that typically would be reverberant, like classical music in recital halls, etc. Others might be in very, very dry spaces where then you would add reverb in post-production. But you are going to want to listen to what it sounds like once you have your mic set up and think about what those room acoustics may be doing to the sound. So some easy ways to do that is to just dampen things. You could hang up blankets, make sure you close the curtains if you have curtains on windows and things like that to try to minimize the type of reverberance that you might get back into the microphone if that's an issue. So here are some resources that I recommend that you pursue to find out the best way to mic your own instrument. The mic manufacturing sites are actually going to have a lot of really good resources for this. So some examples are Shure, DPA, or Audio Technica. So you can go to those websites and oftentimes they'll tell you how to mic a piano, a flute, a guitar, whatever it is that you're trying to figure out, as well as, of course, this is what they're going for, some recommendations from their own stock that would fulfill those purposes. But it does give you an example then of like, oh, okay, so this is, they're saying condenser mics that do this or that, and that it can give you a sense of it, and you can go then to other manufacturers, whatever it may be, and find comparable things. Another great resource, there's lots of textbooks and things like that. I really like Modern Recording Techniques by Huber and Runstein. You could get that from the library and just look up the chapter on your particular instrument, or it's not even a chapter, it's a whole chapter on how to mic all sorts of different instruments. And you could just sort of read that section on your particular instrument, as well as pick up some other tips for how to mic yourself as best as possible. I also want to point out there's two different typical form factors for microphones. So once you do get a microphone, make sure you're using it properly. There are mics that you're used to seeing, like handheld mics that you sort of point at the source, right? Directly at the audio source. And there's others that are side profile, side entry. You can see here the one that I have. I'm talking into the side of it, right? Not into the top of it, right? So just make sure that's like a side address microphone like this versus a handheld sort of form factor, that you're using it appropriately. So, you know, read the manual when you get your mic, right? So RTFM, as they say, and that's going to go a long way for you. So one last thing we're going to talk about, and then we'll take some questions, is clipping. Clipping is one of the biggest things that that's going to mess up your sound when you're thinking about bringing your audio in. So you've got a good mic, you've got everything set up the way you want, everything's great, and then your sound, like everything just sounds distorted and nasty. And you can't figure out why. Sometimes we want distorted and nasty, and that's great if that's what you're going for, but we want to know how to control it. We want to know how to use it artistically in the way that we want. So clipping is when the sound or any part of the signal as it goes through all the various components that you might have in the signal chain, whether it's the mic, the audio interface, the computer itself, whatever. It's when the signal itself exceeds the limits of that particular device or setup or parameter. And what happens is it adds distortion. It adds extra partials on top of the sound and the way that happens. So not unlike an electric guitar. Actually, an electric guitar is doing that in a sort of creative way. That's what that type of overdrive distortion essentially is doing. But we don't necessarily want that on a classical flute sound, right? Or something like this. So what to do? How do we avoid clipping? Well, it's something kind of complex called gain staging, but really all you need to know is that every part of the signal just needs to make sure it's fitting within the parameters that it can handle, right? So the microphone itself will have limits, right? So if I take a very sensitive microphone and then I stick it in a trombone's bell and ask the trombonist to play fortissimo, that's going to probably blow out that microphone. And even if every other part of the signal is fine, that microphone is going to clip. It's going to exceed its parameters and create that type of distortion. So there's always going to be little meters at every little stage that you can see. For example, on your audio interface or on your USB mic, if it has a gain knob, it's gonna go red, or you're gonna see a meter that goes from like green, yellow to red. So when things are in the red, as you can imagine, be careful, right? That's where you're going to start to get clipping, and we really want to avoid that. So just be careful of thinking about clipping at every point in the signal chain, and it'll go a long way to making sure that your sound is working properly. And really, it also tells you when you hear that distortion, you know that somewhere something's clipping, and then simply walk through the signal chain. Is the mic clipping? No. Is the audio interface clipping? No. Is it clipping in whatever software that I'm using? No. Is it clipping on the output of my monitors or something like that, my speakers, my headphones, whatever it is? And then you can sort of find where that's happening and make sure that that's lowering. So this is a good place to stop and see if there's questions. Dustin, about any of the sort of best practices for audio that we've talked about so far?
Yeah, well, I think we have a couple coming in. One that came from Erica. She asked, I think particularly about equipment, but how this might, you might adapt this advice for someone that's trying to use their phone to do, say, a Facebook Live performance.
That's a great question. We are going to talk about how mobile devices come into play in this, but it's not entirely applicable to this. Well, you know, there are also external microphones for mobile devices. So that's one thing that I would recommend. I'm just talking about this portion of the talk. We're going to get into other things like how to optimize software, how to optimize things when you're working with mobile devices and things like that. But just to focus again on the sort of like, how can I maybe upgrade my home studio and think about best practices for audio in general? Even if you're using a mobile device, I do recommend trying to get an external microphone if possible. And then I'll save the rest of that answer regarding mobile devices for sort of later in the talk when I cover those topics.
Okay, great. And we also got a question that overlaps with that from Farah, but also, and I think this is something you're also going to talk about, but is this question more specific to software, Logic, Loopback, the OBS, those things you're covering later? Is that correct?
Yep.
Great. So maybe we'll save that for a little later. And if there's, I don't think there's any other questions at this moment. Any others? It doesn't look like it. Great. Let's keep moving.
Cool. So the next thing we're going to cover is home staging and working with video. So similarly to talking about with audio, if possible, it's worth getting an external camera. The webcams built into your computer or phone are pretty good, but they're going to have limitations. And so it's better to upgrade to something a little bit better quality if possible. And importantly, even if you're getting essentially the same quality as what's on your phone or laptop, the ability to be able to stage that separately from the device itself. So again, like sort of get the camera in a position that optimally frames you and your instrument, for example, but that's not going to be the same place where you optimally will put it to have the microphone for the sound. Being able to get everything in its optimal place is a major advantage. So being able to upgrade your stuff a little bit is also very useful. So an example, the one that I'm using actually right now is the C92 HD Pro webcam from Logitech. Sorry, I didn't put the manufacturer there. And you know, that's $80. So, you know, we're not talking about a ton of money, but that will help you to get a better quality image than your built-in one. And again, be able to allow you to place it where you'd want. It's also useful to think about if you're running something from your computer, you can also then use your phone or tablet as a second camera or third camera, depending on how many devices you have, to shoot things from different angles and actually provide a really interesting sort of environment for this. So oftentimes when I've done live performance, I might be at my acoustic drum set doing sort of like drums and electronic sound from the acoustic sound of the drum set, but then I might also be using like an electronic kit, all just sort of, not acoustic sound, MIDI triggers. And that is in a different place. So I'm going to get up from the drum set, I'm going to move over to this other thing and then do a piece there. And it's really useful to actually already have that framed and set up. And all I do then is on my software, switch to a different camera. And here I am then sort of perfectly framed in this other location, now playing a different instrument, right? So that's really great. Or if you're playing in an ensemble, for example, you'd be able to then switch to different people, assuming then those people are in the same space. Of course, if people are in different spaces, they don't have to have their own cameras, and you can switch to those as well. So just a point about that, thinking about possibly upgrading your video device if you can. But some other things to think about as far as staging, and I've seen a lot of a variety of things that some of this for some of you will be so obvious if you're sort of visually minded that you, of course I'm going to do this, but I have seen people who didn't sort of consider it at first because they're used to being on a stage and not thinking about what that stage necessarily has to look like, because the stage is the stage and I go up to my piano and I play it, or whatever, I walk onto the stage with my clarinet and I play it. So what does it mean to then have a stage in your home? So you obviously want to find an attractive place, an attractive setting for your performance. So wherever you usually happen to do your home office stuff, that might not be the best place to have a concert. It might not have good acoustics, right? So, you know, and it also might not look very good. So you want to find a good place in your home, and if necessary for your performance, especially if it's a public facing thing, move your computer, move your devices, whatever it may be, to that location and set something else up. Be very careful to take note of the lighting and see how you look and test this, obviously. You want lighting that is in front of you so that you're lighting up your face and your instrument. If you're only backlit, you're gonna look like a silhouette. And be careful about natural light. So right now, you know, the sun is up. I have some windows in my room. I'm getting a lot of natural light. But if I was to do a performance, you know, at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, the lighting is going to be very different. So you really want to test things, making sure that the lighting conditions will be the same or similar to when you're doing the performance. So be careful of that natural light and realize that it won't be the same type of natural light during testing. Perhaps won't be the same light in testing that it is during your performance, and to be ready for that. So I always recommend that you have an additional lamp ready that you could put somewhere if needed at your sort of sound and video check time, to make sure that you can have additional light as needed, right? You can always make sure, you can always leave something off, but if you're at maximum lighting and it's not enough, then there's nothing else really that you can do. Except maybe move it around to the front or something like that. So have an extra lamp and be ready to go, as far as that's going to go a long way. Now, this really speaks to Erica's question a bit, is that we are going to sometimes have to compromise. I mean, really, all of this talk is about the compromises that we make when we're talking about these scenarios, right? We're compromising between audio quality and the ability to connect. We're compromising between video and audio placement, for example. So if you're using, if you don't have these external devices, then you have to figure out the best location to shoot, to take this shot, to take this video shot, as well as to capture the audio. And sometimes it means having a balance, right? Where it's the shot is okay, but it gets the mic close enough to the thing, but the mic would be better positioned actually really close to the instrument, but then it gets a really, you know, super up close video shot, and it doesn't work. So, you know, find that compromise, thinking about both the video image and the microphone, particularly in public facing performance settings, where the audience is going to want to see you. But it's also good for rehearsals. You know, it's important that we not only hear each other, but see each other when we're playing together, of course, right? So you want to have a shot that allows your fellow performers to see, you know, get some sense of what you're doing with your body, as we do in any sort of chamber music setting. So that's really it for the video, just the video staging stuff. Are there any questions on this? I imagine that this is a little bit more obvious than most of the other things. And next, we're going to get into some home network stuff. But any questions?
There was one question that came from Ida about using multiple cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you can talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so if you have multiple camera sources, then depending on what you're using to stream your software, and we're going to talk about streaming software, then you can switch between those in the show to be able to do that. So like, as I mentioned, if I have different cameras set up, I can switch between them during the middle of the show. And the switching, so essentially they're all running at the same time. But what I decide to show the audience, I'm deciding in the software, which we will discuss in an upcoming topic. But what's much better than that, then if I, for example, have my webcam pointed at the drum set and that's framed well, but then it's time for me to go to this other, you know, sort of electronic kit. Now I'm moving the camera and fidgeting with it and going and sitting. Oh, I cut my head off. I have to go back and fit. So the audience has to see all of that, right? Which isn't necessarily bad, because in some of these cases, we have what we have and we do what we can do, right? This is all about compromise. But if possible, you can use multiple cameras to create a more seamless experience for the audience, where everything is already framed appropriately, and then you can just switch between the cameras. Any other questions, Dustin, or should I go ahead and move on to some home network stuff?
We have a question about stands. I'm not sure if that means stands just to hold the camera. And then, yeah, so anything, I guess, and questions about how you recommend positioning the cameras and the microphones, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would, you need a stable place that's going to hold things down, but I wouldn't go too far with worrying about, say, for example, stands in general, as long as it's on a stable place. Like the audience isn't going to see sort of what's behind the scenes. So this room is kind of in my typical studio mode right now, and it's fairly neat. I have my like keyboards around, and I have a whole bunch of technology over here, like MIDI controllers and my electronic drum kit, and then I've got my acoustic kit back there. But when I'm playing a show in this room, that side of the room is gorgeous. It has like nice lighting. I even have like theatrical lighting in here that I set up. And, you know, you can see the drum set framed well. You can see the maybe electronic kit if I'm playing that as well. And then this half of the room is a complete disaster. It's just cables everywhere. I try to keep them as neat as possible, but everything is moved around. You know, things are up on like music stands that are with books on them that are holding up a webcam. It does not look pretty, but the audience doesn't see that part. It's functional. It works extremely well. It's very stable and secure. It's not going to fall over or cause any problems. I'm not going to trip on anything while I'm moving around. But it's not pretty. So, you know, I wouldn't worry too much, especially if you're trying to figure out how to best spend your money on things like stands in this case, especially, you know, if they're not going to be in the frame for the performance.
That's all we got at this section.
Okay,
yeah.
so let's go ahead to some best practices for home network. And we're kind of increasingly moving up in difficulty here to some degree. So for some of you that are already covered or already know this stuff very well, you're gonna find that we're gonna move into the topics that I'm sure everyone is very interested in particular, how to connect all these things. So for your home network, some things to think about is upgrading your network speed, because the bandwidth that you have is going to be the limit of what you can do. So how many people you can connect with on the internet to play, how stable that connection is going to be, et cetera, really depends on your network speed. So that's another place you might consider making an improvement to what your, you know, what your connection is and what you're doing. So think about that. You could upgrade your router, for example, which is also going to have a similar thing. And regardless of what you have, if possible, use a hardline connection like an Ethernet cable rather than Wi-Fi. That is going to greatly increase your network stability, as you know, as well as things like the speed and things like that. So one easy thing you can all do right now is get an Ethernet cable and connect your router physically to your computer when you're doing these types of performance things. Also, you know, check your network speed. You can go to, like, for example, speedtest.net, and then that's going to show you your upload and download speed. And not only can you check that that is compatible with what your network provider is saying that they're giving you, your ISP, you can, you'll also know sort of what, you know, what's available to you in these different performance scenarios, because you'll know what your upload and download speeds actually are, all right? So there are some general network issues that we need to consider. And here's where we're going to start to get into some more complicated topics. So the first thing is there's no silver bullet, which means that the infrastructure for the internet cannot handle high quality audio in real time. It's not possible with what the infrastructure is outside of our homes right now. So there's always going to be a trade-off between quality and latency, right? So latency it means how long does that signal take to get from one place to another, right? And that's what we're all dealing with. So that's the real compromise that we're dealing with when we're talking about this type of networked performance. We can generally say that rhythmic musical performance requires latency to be less than 30 milliseconds. That really depends on a lot of things, like the tempo of the piece, the type of instrument it is. So drums have a really sort of like quick attack that allows us to notice when they're not lined up easier than, for example, a voice in most cases, or a flute that has a more breathy or longer attack. String instruments, it takes them longer to get started, just within a few milliseconds, but those couple of milliseconds means that if they're not exactly lined up, we don't notice it as much. Whereas, for example, two snare drums playing together, that's why, like, drum corps, you know, they crank those snares up really tight so that you can purposefully, so that you can hear that they are playing so synchronously within just 1 or 2 milliseconds of each other. Whereas if you know, other instruments like the bass drums, or for example, you know, you wouldn't notice the same delay. So maybe they're 10 milliseconds apart, but you can't hear that that sound synchronous in that case. So it is possible within the same city, or really within about 100-mile radius, to create this type of synchronous performance by sacrificing a little bit of audio quality, and we'll talk about what that is. There's a really great video talking about this with regard to a Jack trip that Christian McBride did on NPR. So I encourage you all, you might want to Google that and see a little bit about latency and also Jack trip, which I'll be talking a little bit about as well. But it's important to note that latency occurs obviously in both directions, from me to you right now, as well as from you to me. So there's no real sense of now. Of course, if you've studied philosophy at all, you know that that's the case just generally, but it's even more exacerbated. So let's say we had a 300 millisecond latency between player 1 and player 2. We would describe the round trip latency as 600 milliseconds, which means that the response, right? So if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hear that 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you decide to come in on the downbeat, I'm going to hear your response another 300 milliseconds later, right? So it takes 300 milliseconds for you to hear my stick click of 1, 2, 3, 4, but then my hearing back from you takes another 300 milliseconds. So the one-way latency is important to note, but the two-way latency is how the performers interact with each other. So that's really important when we're talking about. So again, we're going to trade some quality for sufficiently low latency, but the quality that we're talking about can be minimal enough that it's totally worth doing to play. It's also important noting that the number of performers in the network increases the required bandwidth and number of connections. You need 2 connections for each performer, both an input and output, and that's going to increase for each performer that's on that network in total. So let's start by talking about Zoom. Zoom is not good at audio, even at its best. It has extremely high latency, and yet sometimes it can be the best thing for you to use in these settings. In particular, we use this in Andrea's Zalon, and that's where that Z in the Zalon, sort of to differentiate it from the salon with an S in front. That's where it comes from. It's a Zoom salon, a Zalon. And you know, why would we use this? Well, it's very easy to use, and there's massive familiarity, right? So when we're talking about having 8 performers, you know, every other week trying to get together and make this happen, I don't know what they're going to have available to them, right? Are they tech savvy enough to get some of these more advanced things working? Maybe not. So Zoom might be the best thing to use. It also can be done on mobile devices. So getting to Erica's question again, a lot of the other stuff that we're talking about here can only be done on a computer, on a laptop or desktop computer, whereas Zoom can be done on mobile devices. So that really opens it up. It allows for a wide variety of things that might make it the best platform to use in these cases, even though the latency is very high and the audio quality is not that good. And the reason why the audio quality, even at its best, is not that good is there's the limit of the band of frequencies that Zoom will send is limited. It's not what we would need to play all the frequencies of that humans can typically hear. So that's a shorthand of why that is still, even with the best settings, not going to work well. But again, it sometimes is the best thing to do. So how can we make the Zoom settings work for us the best that we can? So we need to go into the preferences. It's also important to note that you might also want to check out the web browser level preferences of the administrator settings in your Zoom account when doing this as well. But the basic one is to think about that we want to not have noise canceling or feedback suppression. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, Zoom is canceling out things like the noise of my computer, which is quite loud. If I had a fan or my air conditioner was running right now, you would hear that. It's canceling that stuff out. It's also not allowing for feedback, right? So I'm hearing, for example, Dustin, when he speaks to me out of my speakers, I'm not using headphones, but my voice, even though it's going in, is not playing back out of those speakers, because we can end up with a feedback loop and get that squeal that we're all very used to hearing as a even sort of trope in movies. You know, the microphone squeals and interrupts everything, right? That feedback it is something that we absolutely need to avoid anytime we have a microphone and speakers in the same sort of exposed and running in the same system. So it's taking care of all of that for us, which is really great for conferences and voice calls like this, but it's not great for music. I also recommend, even in this case, although mobile devices can be used in this setting, that you do use a computer and external mics. If you have one, you're going to have more flexibility to get things set up. So I'm going to show you a video that walks you through some of these settings and will allow you to get things set up appropriately. But before I do that, I just want to talk through them. So the first thing you're going to do in Zoom, you can even do this right now, is go to the preferences for Zoom. And then on the left sidebar, you're going to go to the audio settings. If you click on the advanced tab, you'll then be able to toggle the show in meeting option to enable original sound. So you want that on. If you go back then to the out of advanced to the regular audio settings, you're going to also want to turn off the automatically adjust microphone volume. So that is going to, if I, move away from the mic or I move too close to the mic, Zoom's going to adjust that for me, which is fine for a voice where we generally want to be heard at the same volume all the way through. We don't want you to hear, me, if I start speaking more quietly, you still should be able to hear me. That's what Zoom is meant to do. Or if I make an outburst, like a loud laugh or something, you don't want that to all of a sudden blow out your eardrum. So it's going to typically do those adjustments for us, but we do not want that in music. Obviously, we don't want it to be radically changing this if we do an accent or a dynamic change from pianissimo to fortissimo or whatever it may be. Because we're disabling this automatically adjust microphone volume, we then need to carefully adjust the microphone level ourselves to make sure that in particular it's heard and that we're avoiding clipping. So we just want to make sure it's not too loud and not too soft. We don't want to be using the full all of the sound plus some extra in that clipping thing. So you can see there's a little bar there that will allow you to kind of visualize that. And we want it to be not going up and past the last bar. We want to be leaving a little bit of what we call headroom, a little bit of space that remains at the top of that. So I'm going to play a video that allows you to actually see how to get to all these settings. I can't show you that in Zoom because one thing that you can't share on Zoom is Zoom. So I'm going to play a video to show you some of these settings. Zoom is a platform that is designed for voice calls, but we can change the settings to make it appropriate for music. I like to say that we are using a conference table for a stage, and so there are some limitations involved. You will need to download the Zoom app, and if you haven't already, create an account. Once the app is installed and you are logged into Zoom, please note that you can create a new meeting for only yourself in which you can test the video and audio in advance of your tech consultation. I will be going over the settings as they are seen on an Apple computer. In other words, the images that you'll be seeing in the video are for Mac OS, but the settings for a Windows computer are the same. It may look slightly different. Once you are in the app, click on the Zoom US tab on the menu on the top of your screen. Then go to Preferences. Click on the Audio tab on the left sidebar. Here you will see some important settings that we need to check and possibly change. First, make sure that automatically adjust microphone volume is not ticked. Then at the bottom right of the window, click the Advanced button. Here, please tick the box that says Show in Meeting option to enable original sound from microphone. This will enable us to allow unaltered sound from your microphone to enter the Zoom session. Normally, Zoom has algorithms running that try to eliminate any sounds that are not a speaking voice. Obviously, we do not want that running while musical tones are playing, as these would be suppressed or entirely eliminated. If you click the back button, you will see the microphone input volume slider, as well as an input level meter. We will be using this with you during your sound check to make sure you are getting appropriate levels for the performance. If the level is too loud, we will get a type of distortion called clipping, which will seriously mess up your sound. If the level is too low, we will not hear you well. Don't worry too much about this slider for now. The Salon technicians will work with you at the sound check to get the best possible sound before your performance. You can close the setting windows now. If we enter a meeting, you will now see a button in the upper left corner of the window superimposed over the video image that says Turn on or Turn off original sound. We want original sound to be on, and this button is intuitive for some and less intuitive for others. The text on the button tells you what will happen when you click it, not the current state of the original sound. And therefore, we want it to read Turn off original sound. Now that original sound is on, your audio feed should come into the Zoom session without any of the typical noise canceling or feedback suppression algorithms. Great, If you've done all of that, then you're ready for your tech consultation. So as you heard, that's an excerpt from a video that I send to performers that are going to be performing on the salons. That's why you heard things about like at your tech consultation or at your sound check and things like that. That gets them prepared for setting up their system in advance of that particular concert. But that gives you an overview of the settings you'd need for Zoom. Zoom is a platform that is okay. So also some notes about a sound check in advance of your concerts when talking about those types of things with regard to networking. Once you check things in Zoom, you're going to want to have everyone stay on the session until the performance happens, which could be a few hours depending on how your sound checks run and how long that goes. So you want to make sure that people know, or that you yourself know, to leave your computer or mobile device plugged into a power source, because it's going to be on and running in a session that whole time. This is not just for Zoom, but really for anything that you're going to test in advance and then leave running for the performance. You want everyone to connect and then stay connected and then sort of go live. You don't want people connecting in the middle. You want to get it up and running and stable and everything, all the settings are correct, and then leave it going. All right. So if there's some roles for concerts that are really useful in thinking about this. So typically there's a lead engineer we found that's really useful. I've typically taken that role, which is actually running those, making sure all of the sound stuff is running smoothly and doing the sound checks. But we'd also have things like a stage manager that's handling the audience side of things, allowing people in, handling even security issues if they were to happen. Like let's say there was a Zoom bomber that comes in and does something inappropriate. How does that get handled? You know, I don't want to be playing the drums and then, I have to stop and handle some Zoom thing. So having a stage, a house manager that essentially is handling the audience. I think I said stage manager before for that, but a house manager that handles the audience and all of those issues around that, answering questions is really important. And then a stage manager that would handle things like changing the cameras, making sure that everything is running smoothly as far as that goes, making sure that the next person's mic is unmuted, their video is on and appropriate, so that that's all running really smoothly. So these are really analogous to some of the roles that we would have in a venue, right? As well as having a host. We're going to talk more about that, but having a host that is really particularly important in the case of these types of concerts, and we'll talk about why a little bit later. So we'll just stop for a minute. We're just being mindful of the time. I want to make sure we get through more of these demos and things like that. So if maybe we could take one question, Dustin, if there's something about any of this type of stuff.
We don't see it. We don't have any questions right now.
Great.
Yeah, please.
Cool. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So if anything comes up in anyone's mind, we'll go there with that. So we're going to start talking about some network platforms, which I'm sure many of you are extremely interested in. The first one I'm going to mention is Jack Trip. This has gotten quite a bit of notoriety, I think, lately. It's really great in a lot of ways. For example, there's an NPR video that Christian McBride talks about Jack Trip and the possibilities of Jack Trip. And again, I said earlier, you know, I suggest that you Google that and check that out just to get some more information about what the possibility is. But what I've found is, although I've got it up and running and have done a number of sessions with it, it's going to be too complicated to set up and maintain for most users, I find. It does provide the best, not only the best quality connection alongside the most options for routing and that trade-off between quality and latency, but it will take a long time for most users to get it even set up in the first place, as well as then a whole lot of troubleshooting at the start of most sessions. The documentation for it is confusing a little bit, I think, for a lot of users. It requires an Ethernet connection, so it's not possible on Wi-Fi. But I mention it also because Jack Trip Hub is something that they're working pretty furiously on, which is also why they're not providing as much support for the current Jack Trip. And that is going to, if they get that up and running in the next month or so, which was, I think, their plan, that's going to be way less difficult to use, that they're setting this up to be a little bit more commercially accessible. So if you're not used to, say, using terminal to like run code in your computer or things like that, then this is not really for you. But I just, again, mention it because of not only Jack Trip Hub, but also the notoriety that it has gotten. So what I'm going to mention is SoundJack, and we're going to get into the demo for this. This is going to be, it's moderately easy to use. Most of you are going to be able to install and get this working without any help. It works best with Ethernet, but it will work with Wi-Fi, and it has the same number of options for maximizing the trade-off between quality and latency that JackTrip does. It doesn't have quite all the same number of internal routing type of things, but most users are not going to do that. And if you're using that anyway with JackTrip, you probably can also figure out all these other ways to route your audio because you're sort of an advanced user that can do that. So if you're using JackTrip, you could probably find other ways to do what JackTrip doesn't do. So SoundJack and JackTrip, as far as audio quality, are going to be similar. So let's take a look at how to use SoundJack and how to set it up on your computer. So the first thing that you're going to do, in just a moment, I'm going to open up a browser here and share it with you, is go to soundjack.eu. So this is where you're going to be able to connect to things. The first thing you'll need to do is create a username and password. So you have to have an account. So you'll have to set that up. I'll point out that they're also moving to a new site, which I do recommend that they're no longer supporting this old site. And that new one is dev.soundjack.eu. But I think that one kind of has been, at least for the past few weeks, going up and down for maintenance a little bit. And then this old one is still running concurrently. So you can jump between the two different platforms if you need it at a time when the other one is, say, down for maintenance. So once you create your login and username, you'll be able to log in. You'll need to go to, so once I log in, you'll see there's, oh, I'm using the other password. Let me go to the dev one. 1 second. So the new dev site has, you'll make a new username and password, so your account won't be compatible across them just yet. Just a second. So you notice then you get these other tabs like download. So this is where you'll need to find the version for your operating system and then download the application that's going to run alongside SoundJack. So once you download and install that, you're going to need to run that. And it's going to be something like SJC and then the date that it was written. So if we're using this older site, we're going to do SJC. It'll look like SJZ 200616 to show the date that it was last updated. So I'm going to allow it to have the network connections. And you'll see all that happens is now, I don't see any programs running. No window has opened up, but there is this little SoundJack icon. It looks like an XLR port on the menu bar at the top. So that's how you know that that's running. It's running in the background. Now it's going to sort of listen to, I'm allowing it to listen to my audio and network it. I'm then going to go to the stage. I'm going to get a warning because this is the older site. So it's saying that it's outdated and switched off as of the 21st of July. It'll then give me the option to either go to the new site, the dev.soundjack.eu, or to stay here. I'm going to hit cancel. And then it'll take me to the public stage. And then this is where I can connect with anybody who's on here. So make sure that your username, it is going to be public facing. I can see all the people that are on here currently. I can also see a whole bunch of settings that I can then set up. You could set them to more basic settings, beginner, advanced, or expert settings. I'm going to show you the expert settings and just kind of walk you through it. Here on the public stage, I could create a private room, which is what I often do when I'm playing with an ensemble, so that we could just see the people who are in our group. And you would just create one. It will give you a randomly assigned number. You create a password, and then you need the password to get into that private room. But it looks identical to the public stage. There would just be less people in it. You could choose to manually or accept calls, accept any call, or decline any call. So you're going to want to make sure that unless you want anyone to be listening in on your mic, that you don't have automatically accept any call. It shows you your IP address. You can set your audio interface input and output. That might be your also your internal mic or sound card, depending on what that is. It allows you to set the sample rate, but currently it only supports 48,000 hertz sample rate. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, but it will. They're planning to support other things. Shows you the buffer size for your sound card, which is sort of how much data it's going to take in and process at a time. How many channels you'd like to send. My audio interface has 4 ins and 4 outs, so I select all 4 of them. This is the volume for your personal feedback of like the sound of your instrument. You can make that nothing if you don't want to hear yourself in the mix. You can set the sample buffer, audio sample buffer, whether you're sending local audio or the whole mix, which is useful if you were going to say send this out to a streaming service. You could set the network buffer size, and then here's the really important one. Now we're going to get to the, if any of that was unclear to you, don't worry too much about it. What's really important here is this codec. This is how much of a data stream we're sending. If I send a linear one, it's essentially uncompressed audio. It's like the most high quality audio, right? I'm going to get very high latency when I do that, but I can keep on going down the chain. 48 kilobits per second is kind of like an MP3. I mean, it's not comparable really, but like I find the audio quality, the highs get a little crunchier and things like that, but we're used to listening to MP3s and they sound good. So you can run this at 48 kilobits per second and actually create really low latency connections. It doesn't currently support video, but they're planning on doing that, as well as a shared metronome that everyone can do. It isn't currently supported. So what I would do if I wanted to connect with someone like the local host is I would just hit play. It would send a message saying, do you want to connect? I would hit yes on the other, if I was receiving a network connection, and then you'd be hearing audio. That's it. The one other thing that you can do with this is, aside from, again, I would start by changing this kilobits per second and making that as high or as low as needed as a gross adjustment. And then the last thing that I would recommend here is there's a network jitter option, this drop down right here. And what that is, of course, the network is sending sort of packets of data, and occasionally the network slows down a little bit, and that data doesn't come in as quickly as needed. So there's jitter, right? The amount of latency, the amount of slowdown isn't consistent throughout. So you can create what's called a buffer. It'll store a number of samples. It creates more latency because it's saving those up and making sure it receives all of them before it plays it back for you. And what happens is if it misses one, if the buffer time that you've set is too low for a particular packet, it says, okay, too late packet, and it just drops that packet. It doesn't play it or include it in the audio stream because we need that audio to be real time. And so if we just waited for every packet to come, we might be waiting a really long time if we got frozen up. So you just then, after you've made your gross adjustment of the audio codec, you would just adjust this jitter buffer until it's appropriate. And then it will also have a latency reading here that will tell you how many milliseconds of latency. So playing with people in Philly, I've gotten this as low as 5.5 milliseconds, which is something like being on opposite sides of the stage. So that's very much synchronous for real-time music making, right? So it'd be like me standing on one side of the stage and you being on the other side of the stage. Of course, the further away you go, the more latency you're going to get. The slower someone's network connection is, the more latency you're going to get in that case. All right, so that's really all there is to connecting SoundJack. You could then connect to multiple people. You know, I can connect to as many people as I can fit with my bandwidth. Right? It's pretty easy once you're at that point. So, are there any questions about SoundJack and setting up for that?
Yeah, we have a couple questions. Some might be a little on the technical side, but maybe you'll be able to answer them. Maybe we can refer. There was one question, if you can just like zoom in a little bit. It's a little small for some folks to see.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, make your browser window a bit bigger. And then people were curious what the round trip latency was, or if that's what you were referring to, I suppose.
So round trip latency then would be, in that case, was 11 milliseconds, sorry, 11 milliseconds.
Great, and then can you just confirm which URL people should go to? Is it the dev site or the non-dev site?
Right now, because they're in between these things, I would say go to dev.soundjack.eu and work there. That is where this is going. This is no longer supported. But when the dev site does go down for maintenance, if you are in a rehearsal, you'll want to then also go back and use this one. You need two different of those SoundJack drivers. There's the old one for this stage, and there's a new one for the current stage. So if you want to be able to use SoundJack all the time without having this, perhaps the dev site will go down. I think in a couple of weeks, that isn't going to be an issue with the dev site anymore. But it's currently where sometimes that will go down for maintenance and development, and then you'll need to go back to this one. So if you really want to consistently always know you can get to SoundJack for your rehearsals, then you'll kind of want to navigate both. But I would start with the dev site because eventually this one will be gone and you'll want to be in the dev site going forward.
And another question was, one was when you got the 5.5 milliseconds, was that at home or on campus? And then the next one.
That was here in my home connecting to a graduate student of mine in Doylestown. Great.
And then the last question that I see here is basically, is there a video component or a aspect of this, or is this just audio?
This is only for audio. They are planning on building in a video component. So you actually see that there's a little drop down over here that says video or no video, but it doesn't work currently. So this was in development when the pandemic hit, and they rushed to release it, obviously because they knew it was going to be extremely important for people to have access to something like this. And so some of these things that are still sitting there that they didn't even remove because they weren't going to take the time to even sort of get some of these things out of the way so that it could be released as quickly as possible during a time when everyone really needed it. So you'll need to use Zoom or something like that just to see the other people. But then you would mute the audio in whatever you're using to share video.
Great, thanks. That's it for questions.
Okay, great. So let's go to just talking quickly about a MIDI network. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's not going to be applicable for everybody. But for some of you that are either electronic musicians or even for people doing voice and there's a pianist and you want to hear that, some voice folks are having a hard time because wearing headphones and singing it isn't always great. And it can cause a lot of issues. So you might want to actually sort of pipe in MIDI to the vocalist's space and be able to control that. It's built into any Mac computer, so that's what makes it useful. There's also this sorry, I got a little mouse happy there. There's also this RTP MIDI for Windows, which looks identical. It's built to look just like the Mac version. It's pretty easy to use. It requires, it works best with Ethernet, but will work with Wi-Fi, and it requires port forwarding. So you will need to be able to go into your router and set up port forwarding, which is a pretty easy thing to do, but you'd want to Google that if you haven't done something like that before. It also means that you need access to your router. So if you live in an apartment building where, say, the router, the Wi-Fi is provided by the landlord and you don't have administrator privileges to that router, then this wouldn't work for you. So that's for example, something a lot of my students deal with. And so they even though they could do it if they had access, they simply don't have access. This is one of the lowest latency ways of sharing musical data because MIDI is a so much smaller data package than audio would be. So you need to know your IPv4 address, right? So your static address, which if you don't know, you can go to whatismyip.com to find that out. And this is really just to show people just to sort of pique your interest around this technique. And the idea is that then you're going to duplicate the DSP on both systems. So what that means is, for example, I do this a lot in my, I have an electronic music duo with Rajiv Madella, who I mentioned at the top of this. And so we have identical DAWs open that has all of our information on both of these, right? So it has all of my sounds, all of the inputs that I'm playing, as well as his. And I'm sending MIDI data to him, he's sending MIDI data to me, and then we're just routing that MIDI data. So on my computer, I'm hearing all of the audio generated by my computer. And on his computer, he's hearing all of the audio generated on his computer. So we're not sending any actual audio data files over the internet. Instead, we're just sending those very small MIDI data packets that can go much, much faster. And then each of our computers are sort of constituting the sounds themselves in real time, right? So that my computer is making all the sounds for me, as well as the sounds that he's making, but for me to hear. And the same thing in reverse is happening on his. So I'll show you that very briefly because it's pretty easy to set up. It's included if you go to your audio MIDI setup utility on a Mac computer, or again, if you're on a Windows computer, you can go to the RTP MIDI application. And you'll see something like this. You might have to open some windows oh, sorry, I'm clicking on this. So you might have to open the windows for the audio devices, the MIDI Studio. But the important one that maybe many of you have never used is this network device browser. And what you get is this MIDI network setup window, which is the one we want to focus on. Sorry, and let me just open this up. If it's a little bit small, I apologize. Oops. So actually, sorry, the way to get there is to go to your MIDI Studio, click on this globe, and that pulls up the MIDI network setup utility. And basically what you do is create a directory of people. You'd have to find out their static IP address. As I said, you can go to whatismyip.com. And then you would create a session. You'd put the ports, typically it's 5004 that you forwarded on your router. And then you would hit connect, right? So if I wanted to connect to, for example, my friend Raj, I'd click him and hit connect. You'd then see if he accepts that connection, you would have to approve it on his end. You would then get I would see him here as well as the latency. I'd start to see red lines popping up that show the latency of each MIDI data packet as he sends it. Then he's just another MIDI source. So just like I could select my Ableton Push or my electronic drum kit over here, or this MIDI keyboard, I would also then be able to select the network MIDI and make that a routing source for a particular thing, right? So that's a really easy way. Once you've got it set up, you then have that as a MIDI network source. And that's the lowest latency that you're going to get because the MIDI data is just so small. So we are able to do drum and bass, at 170 BPM together, both playing drums, and he's in Brooklyn. So, that's extremely high tempo, high tempi, with very low latency. So I'm going to just move ahead. If there's any questions about that, I can take it at the end, or I'm also happy to follow up with people about how to set up a MIDI network in the future, but I don't think it's going to be as applicable for folks. And I want to get on to talking about OBS before we run out of time. The OBS is a streaming software. It's free, it's open source, so you can just download it, install it, and then start to get it working. It's not too difficult to use, but it does require, I think, some initial guidance, which hopefully I can provide. It's extremely versatile, and it's a relatively low CPU overhead for something like this. So it'll allow you to strive to stream to Facebook, to YouTube, anything like that. There are some other things out there. I'll just mention Ecamm as an example. It's not free, it is paid. It is typically, all of these are going to generally be conference software. So Ecamm works best with Skype. Skype only allows one audio stream to happen at a time. So essentially you can't talk over someone in Skype. You would just either talk and their mic gets cut off, or if they're talking loud enough, they're gonna cut your mic off entirely. So you can't talk simultaneously, which means in music, we can't do, we can only take turns, which doesn't make sense. So let's take a look at OBS. Once you open up OBS, you're gonna get something like this. And once you see the initial thing of essentially setting up scenes, I think you'll find it's fairly easy. So down here, you're gonna set up scenes. You think about this as like parts of your performance, right? So for the first scene, I might have something like an image that I want to share, that would be like the title card, right? So I could put in something like really any image on my computer that I want to be the title card of the show. And then I would go to the sources for that scene. So I could select sort of any of these here. You could see there's audio input captures, display captures, media sources. So I would pull in anything from this list, including an image, right? And I could create a new one. If I hit OK, then it will ask me where to browse to the image file. I could then browse to that image file. For the sake of time, I'm not going to just add an image. So the next thing I would do is add a scene, for example, scene 2, which might be the performance itself. So in this case, I might have a video capture device and I would set, for example, my webcam. And then I might also have a separate audio input capture, which I would use my audio interface. And now when I switch to this scene, it will take the webcam and the sound from my audio driver. And then I might create a third scene, which could be a different camera on my system, or it might be a title card, for example, for the end of things, maybe credits or something like that. So you can see something I have set up for the Zalon template, which shows the title card for the Zalon, and then I could click to scene 2. You can also set up these transitions to be fades at 200 milliseconds. It then would go to the stream of that. And then when that's done playing, I could switch back out to the title card, sort of have a nice close. So once I've got this all set up the way I like, I can hit start streaming. The one thing you need to know is that you need to where am I going to stream? So if I go to the audio preferences and I select this stream, it's going to ask you to select where you're streaming it to. In this case, it was to YouTube. And then I'm also going to need my stream key, which you'll find on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or wherever you're going to stream to on your user account. So once you've gotten that, you put it in. It's important that you don't share that because then anyone can send to your channel. And then once that's ready to go, I hit start streaming, and then people will see it live. And you just set the account to stream from, to receive as well. You need to set up Facebook or YouTube to be streaming live as well. So that's really an overview to OBS. But once you understand the scene setting aspect and how those transition, as well as that you're going to have a streaming key and then hit start streaming to go, it's pretty easy to get started with that. I know we're hitting the time here. So Dustin, how would be best? I have only a few more points. Should I wrap it up real quick, or should I just go through these final 4 slides real fast?
Well, I think if you're okay to finish the talk, folks can certainly leave at their own discretion. I did make a note in the chat window. If you have to leave, if you check on our sort of social media and on our website, they'll probably have a video up of this in the next day or so. So you can catch the sort of the last few sections. But if Adam, if you're able, I think proceed, and then we'll take some more questions at the end.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm almost done. So I just wanted to mention a really important aspect, which is building a community around your performance. So this is where we get into the thing of like, so we're sacrificing audio quality. So why not do a totally like badass recording and then put it up on YouTube and whatever. And people, that's a wonderful way to share things. There's nothing wrong with that. So why are we doing this? Why are we trying to, I think we can all understand some of this. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a certain amount of sort of the experience of knowing that this is happening live and that you're there, you're part of it, you're in a community. Those are the things that we want to accentuate. So there's the danger of that. There's sort of the tightrope walk. Are the performers going to be successful? We love that, but the community part is really, really important. And that isn't necessarily going to happen, right? That does not happen. There's not going to be a difference between, for example, even a live premiere versus a live performance in this case, right? Or certainly versus a video that just either does or does not have comments. So how do we get the audience to feel more involved and not just watching another video? And so we need to think differently about what live performance is on the internet. And again, particularly because we are going to be sacrificing, if we're going to be doing performance between people, a little bit of audio quality in order to be able to do this with the latency required. So 2 important ways to do this is hosting and audience participation. So for all of the concerts that I've done, I found the ones where there is robust hosting, introductions, questions, for example, back to the performers, also encouragement to speak in the chat. For example, this is not that dissimilar to the way this webinar is set up, where you have Dustin acting sort of as a host that's fielding questions to me, and Andy also sort of running things in the background in the chat. Being also those sort of initial people that might say, if you say to everyone, oh, leave your comments in the chat, then maybe no one actually uses the chat. But if the hosts are in there saying like, wow, what a great performance. I love this section. Wow, this is beautiful. all of a sudden that encourages the audience to participate. And that's how you start to generate these connections, that people will participate in this really interactive way that does create this community, right? And this is where an online platform can be more advantageous than a live performance, as people can in real time ask questions about things, show their curiosity, show their appreciation, right? So like we think about the difference between going to a jazz show where you might clap after, you're going to clap after the solos versus a classical one. You don't really find out if it's going well until the end, maybe. I guess looking around to see whether people are snoring or like rapidly sitting on the edge of their seat happens in a classical show. But this is even more real-time feedback about what's going on. And the hosts can encourage that in a way that the performers can't, because they can't focus on a chat. Also, you can not only have the chat, but having the audience then field questions back to the performers in real time is a really useful way of doing that. And additionally, we can now do this to people all around the world. We can have people all around the world joining this concert in a way that would be impossible in a live setting, right? So we are losing some things, but we're gaining others. We're gaining a wider audience and a wider reach in any given performance through the internet. So those are the things to accentuate if you can. And that means, maybe bringing more people into the show. But even if you're doing a solo stream of your solo performance, you can be that host as well. You can, when you're done, I encourage you to quickly read some of the chat. Hey, thank you, so-and-so. If you've ever watched a Twitch stream, people playing video games and doing this is extremely popular for that reason, is that it's interactive. So, the value of Twitch and watching people play video games isn't only because people are watching video games, although that is a part of it. I would argue it's actually a minority part of that. It's the community aspect. They all happen to be watching a video game, but they're all participating in this conversation about all sorts of things. And so building that community in a musical performance is extremely important. Lastly, because this is for the American Composers Forum, I want to just mention that there are compositional approaches to thinking about how we can write music for these scenarios as well, right? And we can think about a couple of different ways to do this, and I encourage you to pursue this further. But, there's lots of great music that's being written specifically in and around what we're doing during the pandemic, and lots of ways of presenting that people are interested in saying, well, what's happening during the pandemic? We can ignore or embrace the latency, essentially saying that like it is what it is this category, right? So soundscapes where it doesn't really essentially, it's not important how things line up, or music of that sort is an example of that. You can essentially write for the latency where it's not a feature, it's a bug. Imagine, for example, a canon, but both are the dukes and the comes because they're hearing across each other with that one trip latency, not the round trip latency, and then maybe even lining up, but where neither performer is hearing the performance in exactly the same way. There's pieces that are out there like that, and that's a really interesting thing to think about. And then also to just minimize the latency. And in that case, which is a lot of the techniques that we've talked about in this session, be careful of tempos, right? Because the tempi, the faster it is, the more synchronicity we need in order to handle that and the network jitter and all those other things. So slower tempi are going to be, or work better in that environment. So I'd like to end with one thought along those lines, which is a quote from Brian Eno from A Year with Swollen Appendices that I think is really pertinent to this situation. And that is, whatever you now find weird, ugly, uncomfortable, and nasty about a new medium will surely become its signature. CD distortion, the jitteriness of digital video, the crap sound of 8-bit, all of these will be cherished and emulated as soon as they can be avoided. It's the sound of failure. So much modern art is the sound of things going out of control, a medium pushing to its limits and breaking apart. The distorted guitar sound is the sound of something too loud for the medium supposed to carry it. The blues singer with the cracked voice is the sound of an emotional cry too powerful for the throat that releases it. The excitement of grainy film, of bleached out black and white, is the excitement of witnessing events too momentous for the medium assigned to record them. So I think that's really important to keep in mind as we move forward, that we're not, the lack of audio quality in some ways will be the defining feature of this time in our lives. So the way in which this sounds on Zoom, on these different platforms in order to optimize latency will at some point be the sound of the pandemic. So that's the end of the talk, but I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Adam. I guess I'll turn on my video and be social. Hi, everyone. So we do have a couple questions, and maybe you can throw some more in the Q&A or the chat window, folks. And again, thanks, Adam. A couple questions here. And maybe we'll do another workshop just on the OBS or something down but I think someone asked about, can you easily integrate that with Zoom or other things? And one thing I know is that it streams, when you collect the streaming thing, you can stream it to Instagram, to Facebook Live, to all of those things at the same time. So if you already have a following, you can use that. Are there any extra notes you can add to that?
No, I think that really does cover. I mean, OBS is very flexible in what you can share and how you can share it and where you can send it to. You know, I think it would be useful in some of these things. I wish we had a type of environment, you know, just there's a huge number of people but where we could like actually get people set up. So that might be something both in OBS or even in SoundJack, whatever, and set up some connections and make sure people are rolling with that. That might be something we could do in the future. It would require people downloading all that stuff in advance and actually going into it. But I think, you know, the documentation around all of these is very good as well. So a lot, you know, and there's tons of forums around it. So I encourage people, if you kind of have the broad strokes of it, you probably be able to figure out more of it. But I'm also happy to follow up with any questions even after this. People can contact me, you know, via email after this chat or on social media.
Super. There's a couple of people asked about specific softwares. I'll just read a few of them, and maybe one is, I'm just gonna say Ninjam. Maybe you've heard of that, maybe you haven't. The other one's called Jitsi, I think. Are there any thoughts on those specifically, or maybe other softwares that maybe you can just like rattle off and people can sort of be on the lookout for that might be helpful?
For sharing audio things, or you mean for the video side?
I guess either.
There are a lot of I mean, things are constantly changing also. I would say for the audio side, I recommended these because they're free and because they work extremely well. There are lots of other options, you know, with varying degrees. You know, if you want to, for example, have like a paid, a way of like sort of putting up a paywall for your performance. There are ways to do it already with the types of things that we're talking about. But maybe like having, for example, the house manager, you know, look at the invite list to who paid for a ticket and then letting them in based on that email address or something. But ArtSmesh is a really good one that uses like blockchain for setting up that thing. So you would buy a ticket and then you'd have the encryption key and only you would have it that would allow you into the concert. But, you know, it's paid, you know, it costs a decent amount or whatever. It also provides a lot of great options, allow every performer to have their own separate mix. Like I would be able to hear my mix, like the way you'd want on a stage, like, oh, I want to hear more of the bass because I'm playing drums, but I don't need as much of this or that. ArtSmesh allows for that, which is a really great thing that other platforms don't. There are so many out there that are doing this and doing it pretty well, actually. But I think SoundJack and Jack Trip are the two that again are free. They're doing it as well as anybody else, and you get all of those options for changing things up.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But I do want to let me see how I can share our website. This again will be available online. Give us a day or so. We have to, you know, we'll just make sure we edit it, and then I think we will. We'll also send a survey following up, and we can accept more questions. But I think one of the things we'll be really interested in is, you know, if there's a more specific topic that maybe folks are interested in doing a workshop on, maybe that's something with Adam, maybe that's something else. This is really designed as the overview, and as we enter into at least another 6 months of needing to do this, but also, as Adam, I think, talked about in the end, that I think we're also going to start to unlock the creative possibilities, the opportunities to collaborate with people all over the world. I think we want to, you know, start creating programming that is a little bit more in depth. So feel free to reach out or connect with us on any of these platforms. Our website, acfphiladelphia.org. We have all the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram things, conveniently all at the same handle. And we do have some other events planned in the works. We're working on dates for about, I think there's 8 different things in the works right now. Gonna be stuff from music educators, stuff programs with the Philadelphia Orchestra, programs with other composers. So definitely stay tuned for that. If you're not on an email list already, best way to keep in touch with what we're doing is to do that. And again, thanks for joining us tonight, and everyone have a great rest of your evening. And once again, thanks to Adam. Round of applause virtual, which you can't hear.
Thank you for having me, Dustin. I appreciate it.
Thanks. All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.